Hello and welcome to the latest edition of GW Basketball Insiders. I'm Liam Merker alongside David Korn. We are coming to you live from different places in Capital One Arena, but we're both at Capital One Arena after GW season is potentially over after an 80-65 loss to George Mason. It's their third loss to George Mason this year. Definitely the widest margin. GW led at halftime, and Mason came out on fire in the second half, and they got a 15-point win. So, David, what do we think? What did you think about today's game?
I think that as a group, the GW team and sort of the GW community was sort of underestimating George Mason based on how close they had played them the last two games. They were regular season. They had a share of the regular season A10 title for a reason, and I think they flexed that today with that dominant second half. That was as dominant of a second half that I've ever seen a team have, not just in tournament setting, but really anywhere. And just such a sudden flip from a first half. And I think at one point they were outscoring GW 28-6 in the second half, which is like deep into the second. Like that was just unheard of.
Yeah, it was at the under 8 timeout. They were outscoring that much.
Yeah, and so I just think my biggest thing is, GW was shooting really well to start the game, 7 of 11 in the first half, which is I don't have the figures in front of me, but probably their best three-point shooting half of the season, or at least one of theirs, both percentage-wise and just volume-wise. And it was clear that was going to be unsustainable. And, they were going to have to win the second half in a rock fight, and they allowed George Mason to just get too much on offense. And, interesting press conference. We'll get into some of what Tony Skinn and Chris Caputo and Rafael Castro and everyone had to say. But,
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the – wait, go ahead, sorry.
I'm just going to say, I think this is equally as impressive as it is for George Mason as it is disappointing for GW. And I mean that as in extremely impressive and both extremely disappointing.
Yeah, I think just, I don't think it would have been a shock. Obviously, George Mason was favored on the kind of betting odds today, but it's sort of the nature that it happened in. The fact that, GW took a punch to the mouth from George Mason, 12-0 run for Mason coming out of the half. And then they took another punch, and then they took another punch. And then finally GW maybe got up off the mat, or, past the under 8 timeout. But by that point, it was too late. I think a large reason behind the second half explosion for Mason was Jared Billups didn't play as much in the first half and played a bunch in the second half. Caputo was in his opening statement, was very complimentary of Jared Billups. Said that he's maybe one of the best, defensive players around. He's coached various all ACC defensive players. So Billups was terrific today. But yeah, definitely a disappointing loss, disappointing way to end the season, especially considering the heavy George Mason crowd that was there, which obviously I was not surprised by, but I think there were some kind of neutral A10 observers that were a little disappointed by the lack of GW representation. Not that there were no GW fans, but it's blocks from campus and you're getting outnumbered by your biggest rivals fans.
Yeah, and you talked about Billups. He had a season high in points today. His season high before today was 13, and he poured in 18 points on a perfect 6 of 6 shooting from the field, 2 of 2 shooting from 3. So it's ridiculous. Yeah. He played an incredible game, and exactly, Caputo shouted that out as like the biggest reason why they were able to go on the run. I just want to shout out a stat that our good friend Daniel Frank found. They wrote this: GW had field goal droughts of 4 minutes and 44 seconds, 7 minutes and 3 seconds, and 4 minutes and 33 seconds in the second half alone. Like that's insane.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to win a game when that happens, and that's the testament to Mason's defense. But
and it also showed that this GW team, really sort of relied on Rafael Castro bailing them out a lot of the times with his incredible post game. And when George Mason was able to shut that down, Jalen Haynes, I think, defended him as well as anyone has defended him all year today. And I was really interested in how him and then Imajuru, when he was spelling off the bench, like the two of them were really able to sort of just like be these brick walls down low and really limit what Castro was able to do. And at first they were sort of doubling him, which I don't think was working very well for Mason. And part of the reason why GW had a lot of success in the first half, he was able to split the doubles and he was able to pass out of it. But once I think they sort of were like trying to I think stop him more at the top of the perimeter from really getting down low at all, that's when they really had a lot of success. So, I mean, again, disappointing, but I think this sort of highlighted how flawed of an offensive team this was. And Liam, you'll never guess what I'm going to say. Do you know who they really could have used on a night like this, and who really would have? I'm surprised it wasn't mentioned in the press conference, but
same. I thought it was going to be mentioned as well.
But it's it's one of these things where a team like this was built around having an elite, lengthy 3-point shooter like Garrett Johnson, and on a night like tonight, you do not have a guy like him to bail you out and to kick out to, who you feel confident is going to hit at least a slight majority of these shots. And so, again, disappointing end, but I think there are a lot of positives to take away from the season as a whole. And despite the sour ending to what has become, I think, a kind of a fun rivalry. I mean, I don't even want to call it a rivalry because of how much they kicked GW's ass this year, but there's a lot of familiarity, especially the Caputo connection. There's Chippy. I think we should talk a bit about the KD Johnson situation near the GW bench. I think we should touch on that in a minute, but it's gotten chippy. We had a double technical in the first half. I think if both teams are able to retain a majority of these players, I think this could be, a really fun sort of, lot of people, could be messy next year.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely with you. I mean, briefly going back to your point about Rafael Castro, Jalen Haynes and Majuru played great defense on him. He still had 17 points on 6 for 12 shooting. The thing in these past 2 games, these past 2 days, what was he? 10 for 11 from the free throw line. For someone who's a low 60% free throw shooter, certainly encouraging. It's funny. He was pretty good from the free throw line early in the year, and then pretty good from the free throw line in the last 2 games of the year. Just couldn't put it together. Maybe that's something to do with the daylight savings time. Is there anything to that? Anyway,
I don't know. That's are you pro eliminating daylight savings? We don't need to go to the storyline here for this.
So we can get into that in the aughts of summer.
That'll be a GW Basketball Insiders After Dark topic.
Absolutely. But yeah, no, this definitely has the potential to be a sort of rivalry going forward. Obviously, we'll see. Mason still obviously another game tomorrow. We'll see where that ends up. We've got St. Joe's up by 10 over Dayton right now with a minute and a half left in the first half. So Mason will play the winner of that game.
Before we move on to talking about sort of some of the biggest takeaways from the press conference and what Caputo and Rafael Castro had to say about the future of the program, Liam, I just want to sort of hear, because we did mention that KD Johnson thing, that little scrap, and for maybe people who had missed it, I'm not sure how much or how any of it that the TV broadcast caught if you were watching from home. What did you see from that?
I kind of looked down and looked back up, and I originally thought it was I didn't think it was KD Johnson. I thought it was someone else. I forget who. But I saw GW assistant coach Dwayne Lee clearly responding to something a Mason player said, which I guess was KD Johnson, going over and kind of giving him a little finger point and a little bit of yelling. And then a few seconds later, the referees sort of, refereeing the whole thing. And then a few seconds later, Caputo was coming over and giving him a piece of his mind. He kind of said in the press conference, it's not anything deeper than, I don't want guys thinking that they can say anything they want to.
What I think is
significant my staff
is that this is the second time this season that there's been an issue with that. When George Mason, in the second game of the year between GW and George Mason, when George Mason was at the Smith Center, Jalen Haynes was jawing at the bench. And it was I think it ended up being more of a misunderstanding, but he was trying to talk to Darren Buchanan Jr., who they have a pre-existing relationship with. I'm not sure if it's a friendship per se, but they know each other. And he was making a reference to him being on the bench and his sort of decline in production. And Caputo didn't necessarily get that and didn't necessarily know about at the time their sort of relationship and thought he was saying something to him. And that started a whole other thing. So I just think this is, again, 2 separate instances this year of these teams having a, back and forth that you don't usually see at this level.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, if we're talking about if this were to continue into next year, I mean, probably need to discuss the possibility that Tony Skinn is not the George Mason head coach next year, depending on what they do on Saturday and Sunday, because you would imagine the team would look a little different. So
we know
see,
the Florida State job is filled, so that's where a lot of people were sort of eyeing him to go. But yeah, a lot of high major openings this year.
If he makes the tournament and wins a game, all bets are off.
I mean, I think he's shown already that he's done enough, and so we'll see though. We'll see if he wants to stay at Mason. He played there. He's obviously beloved. I mean, I don't feel comfortable making any sort of sweeping prediction about his next stop. Let's now talk about the future of the GW program, Liam. I want to read our friend Abe Rothstein, friend of the program, asked Rafael Castro about the future of the program. And we're not going to speculate. We don't know anything beyond what Castro said, but I think it's important that we sort of get out there what he said when Abe asked him about the future of the program and what he's sort of looking forward to. Castro said, "I say we take this day by day, getting healthy and meeting as a group to see what next year holds." And that's all he said. So take with that what you will. We'll learn a lot more in the coming days. And Caputo, he wasn't really asked about this. He sort of brought this up on his own, as sometimes happens in these press conferences where he goes on these tangents. He alluded to the fact that some all-conference caliber players were returning. So I think he could be referencing Rafael Castro, Christian Jones, or Darren Buchanan there. But again, we don't know. He didn't make any declarative statement, but he did reference that, which I think is a positive sign. And he also referenced how sort of confident he would be in his ability to work the portal this year. So yeah. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about with the future of the program based on what they said. But again, there's still a lot of uncertainty right now about, what next year's roster will hold.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going into that, this is something he also got into in his press conference, which was talking about the potential for postseason play, for playing in the NIT or the Crown. He said, quote, "We've already told the CBI no." So they will not be playing in the CBI. David and I have canceled our flights to Daytona Beach, Florida.
Wait, I thought we were road tripping. I thought we decided that we couldn't afford the direct flight out of DCA there.
Because it's a non-issue now.
Non-issue.
Those Daytona Beach hotels are, punch in the air right now because we're not coming. But anyway, he kind of said that he feels like they can do both. He says, "I think we can work the portal and play in a postseason tournament." This is obviously contingent on them getting invited.
I'm not sure that'll happen.
There was some dismay expressed after the press conference about, maybe one or two other teams in the A10 that may have better metrics than GW that make an invite over them, that may or may not play in upstate New York or Western New York, from Chris Caputo. So yeah, I'm not super optimistic that they'll get. I think if they got 2 wins, then it would be sort of a different story. I would be a little more certain that they would get an NIT bid. But we'll see. I still don't understand how the Crown works. The consensus seems to be that GW is probably not going to get in, but it all depends on if other teams want it or don't.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and figure out what the Crown is, because I know there's something to do with like auto qualifications from like the Big Ten and like the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a freaking racket as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know. Again, yeah, I don't want to speculate on that until we know for sure. I called on social media. I called upon people to try and explain to me how qualifying for the Crown worked, and nobody could. Ryan tried his best, and I think he thought he understood it, but I wasn't confident in what he was saying. Sorry, Ryan. But postseason would be fun. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily something that should be expected right now. But again, I think it's a positive step that this is a conversation we're having. That was not a conversation we've had in years past. And so I think it's a big step.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the best GW season in years, probably since 2017, when they actually did go to the CBI. So definitely kind of a step in the right direction. They're missing, if you listen to Chris Caputo's press conferences or media availabilities, you kind of heard it ad nauseum that they're missing Garrett Johnson. They're missing one of their best players. They're going to have open spots this year. The sense I get is that, they're not going to lose everyone. There'll be key players will be returning. But again, it's like the season ended an hour ago. So,
yep. But again,
a lot of
college basketball, this is the conversation you have to have. Rafael Castro has 1 more year of eligibility. Darren Buchanan Jr., Trey Autry, Jacoy Hutchinson, and Garrett Johnson have 2 more years. Christian Jones and Ty Bevins have 3 more years. So that's what you got to think about.
Yeah. I mean, any sort of final thoughts? We said we would keep this relatively brief. Any kind of final reflections on today or the GW season?
Disappointing performance today.
Disappointing second half performance.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and maybe Mason goes on a heater and wins the A10 tournament and starts rock fighting these other teams, and no one can score on them. And this is just how they're playing. And GLP's first half will be looked at as the most impressive. Again, I don't know, but I really hope that people don't just look at this game as sort of a disappointing, as a reflection. This team performed better than the sum of their parts, missing arguably the most important piece who this team was built around. And I think people should be really impressed. And this is such a crucial offseason with, the uncertainty surrounding the house settlement and revenue sharing, which is what's next for the future of A10 basketball. And, the amount of talent that GW has right now and has coming back from injury and maybe has the ability to get in the portal, really, really exciting time. And, if things go well and work out, these could be a very fun few years for GW basketball, and we haven't been able to think like that in a long time about this.
And there absolutely, it needs to be mentioned that GW was, I think, more spots higher than this. I'm butchering, basically explaining this.
Here, yes, they finished the highest above their where they were placed in the official A10 preseason poll. They were placed 13th. They finished 7th. That is 7 spots above where they were. That's more of a jump than even George Mason.
6 spots, but yeah.
Oh, well, okay. They finished the highest. It's been a long day.
It's been a long day.
Anyway, they finished the highest. They finished higher. They improved. They finished better than their expected spot, even higher, more than George Mason. When George Mason was considered the surprise to the A10. So obviously GW wasn't competing for a title or anything, but again, I think they should be really happy with how they played.
Yeah, but like you said, big off season, and we'll see how it goes. We will continue to have shows. We'll continue to have coverage. Dave and I are going to stick around at the A10 tournament for the next 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
maybe no GW basketball insider shows the rest of the tournament, but I'll be writing for A10 Talk. Liam, you got a big follow today on Twitter.
I did. Shout out Adrian Wojnarowski. I bet he's watching right now. He followed me on Twitter today. So,
Woj, if you're watching, appreciate the support.
Absolutely. And forget what I said earlier in the show about postseason play and the team you may be the GM of. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys listening this season. And yeah, we will be back soon.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys.